Welcome, everybody. This is an Interintellect Super Salon. I am sitting here with Shruti Rajagopalan and Tyler Cowen, joining me from Mercatus Center at George Mason University in Virginia, where Shruti is a senior research fellow focusing on Indian political economy, as well as leading Emergent Ventures India. And Tyler here is the founder of Emergent Ventures. I happen to be an exceptionally proud and happy grantee of this program. Tyler is also a world-famous economy professor, the faculty leader at Mercatus Center, as well as a beloved blogger and podcaster that shares an incredible array of cultural knowledge and scientific knowledge with us mortals scrolling the internet. Today we will be talking about India and talent, the global thirst for talent, the very fuzzy ways and filters that we apply to finding talent, the importance of scenes and cities, and we will try to figure out whether there are real geographical and cultural differences when it comes to the finding and nurturing of talent. And of course, we will talk a little bit about Tyler Cowen and Daniel Gross's book titled Talent. Welcome, Shruti. Welcome, Tyler. We are so happy that you're here. Let's jump in. I'd love to ask you to Tyler and Shruti about your professional relationship and how did it start, with a bit of a hidden agenda to hear how Shruti, you made Tyler fall in love with the topic of India.
Oh, I had nothing to do with it. Tyler visited India many times before he knew me. He was promoting a book. I think this was the one on globalization and food. I don't remember. This was a book he was talking about in 2005, whatever book that was, Tyler. And so I was in the audience and I said, hello, Professor Cowen, and then walked away. And the following year, I happened to be in Northern Virginia and I wrote to him saying, I met you last year. And he said, of course, we should have lunch. And so we had lunch at a restaurant not too far away. And he has been going to India independent of, us knowing each other much longer than otherwise.
Our lunch was Indian food, but just to bring you up to date on the current landscape, I'm director of a project called Emergent Ventures. A few of you here are connected to it, but we've made awards to people with promising projects. But there's a branch of Emergent Ventures for India, and Shruti is director of Emergent Ventures India. So that's how that landscape has been carved up. Shruti, of course, is from India and knows India very well, and I am not.
Yeah, and we have some EV India winners. Ruhul, I'm going to include you in EV India, even though you're Bangladesh winner. There's Naman and there is Chandana. I just saw her a second ago. So yeah, there are a few EV India winners here, so they can also tell you a little bit about the program. And most of my research and writing is about India. So, looking at EV applications and talking to all the people who've applied and all the people who won, and staying in touch with them also helps me in the rest of my work. So it's a lot of fun. It's good to see you guys, all my EV people.
Yeah, we have. I mean, I'm an EV person as well, and
yes.
I think I was maybe cohort 6, so I'm definitely one of the earlier incarnations, and it has been such an incredible journey to see EV widen and start all these different branches. Now you have EV India, EV Africa. How did EV start, Tyler? How do a bunch of economists from Mercatus, creating adorable Christmas sweater videos on YouTube about how the free market really dictates us to, gift our relatives cash for Christmas, which I tried and it doesn't really work. How does that lead to this kind of incredibly flexible but very consistent and scene-making support of global talent?
Well, I've been operating in the world of philanthropy for a long time, but typically as an asker for money rather than someone handing out money. And 4 to 5 years ago, I was asking a particular foundation for a grant of support. They shall remain nameless, but I assure you they're quite famous. And I submitted a proposal. I got positive feedback. Then they wanted revisions. And the revisions they wanted were so extensive, I actually calculated that I could earn the money myself with fewer hours work than it would take me to revise the proposal. So I just decided, something is wrong with a lot of philanthropy. There should be something you can apply for where it's easy, quick. It might be hard to win, but that it's not burdened down with paperwork, letters of recommendation, what college you went to, that something has to pass through 5 or 6 committees before it can ever be approved. And so through Mercatus, I set up Emergent Ventures, which was this new vision for philanthropy. That's now a little more than 4 years ago. And we have, I think, over 300 winners around the world. Again, a few of you being here. But the key goal was to support talent and also to debureaucratize the world of philanthropy.
I'm really curious how having this personal experience of the completely illogical hurdles that stand between the talent and the means of getting their vision realized in the world, how did that realization correlate to jumping into the talent search, the science of talent search, basically? Because if you read Tyler and Daniel Gross's book, it's full of ideas for removing these hurdles and acknowledging that you do need some filters for finding talent, obviously, but those are completely different from please revise your grant and answer these completely Victorian questions. I'm asking this as a lead up to also understanding the differences between a geography and another when it comes to this, but were there these intermediary steps where, whilst defining the filters for winning an EV grant, you guys may have arrived at more general notions? Okay, what are the questions to ask to check if somebody's talented?
I'll let Shruti speak after I do, but I would just say I've been doing talent search my whole life. I've done a lot of academic hiring. I'm faculty director at Mercatus, where we have about 200 employees. So looking for talent is not at all new for me. It's really been a key theme running throughout my entire life. But Shruti?
Yeah, so I was new to this. Tyler kind of conned me into doing some of this. I wasn't sure at all of my skills, or my ability to evaluate applications. And also all the EV winners were just so diverse. I was like, I have absolutely no idea about like biochemistry or air pollution or all the crazy things everyone works on. So I was a little nervous, but then Tyler said, oh, we have these great applications, just take a look. And it's a tiny pool and they're really wonderful and you might be able to do something more. So he was a little, sneaky about that. And then, a dozen applications in, it got bigger and bigger. Also COVID hit, and then fast grants became big at Mercatus, and, EV also kind of exploded because we started giving a lot of COVID related grants, which were not the technical sciencey fast grants kind of projects. So that's really how I got involved in this. I guess I don't have any experience picking talent specifically before EV, except I was a university professor for a long time. So I'm told that I have honed my bullshit detection very well in the classroom, right? It becomes quite, 4, 5, 6 questions in, you can usually figure out how much people have understood about, what you're teaching or how much they know about a topic. So I guess that's one skill that came in handy. Otherwise, I just try to follow Tyler's template. And honestly, it was pretty straightforward. There were very few steps. It's largely instinct. And I guess my advantage is just knowing the Indian landscape and all the various problems that plague India that just helped me understand the projects much better.
Can you speak more to what you mean by instinct and how cultural that is? Because we're talking about something that starts as an international project from the US and then grows to a level where you think we're dealing with such specific geographies here and with their own problems, strengths, education styles, talent search traditions. It's time to open these branches. How does instinct scale?
I'm not sure mine is scaled. Mine is limited to India. So Tyler might be better at getting at this.
When I started Emergent Ventures, I didn't have a sense how large it would be. So the initial conception for the program was quite small. It's ended up being quite large. But I started getting all these outstanding applications from India. And I realized, of course, I know India much less well than North America or even Europe. So I thought, well, I need someone to help. My view is maybe 1 or 2% of humans are born being potentially great talent evaluators, maybe only 2%. But those people, if they work at it, they can really become very, very good. So I'm in the position of trying to spot the 2% of humans who can be really good at this. And I found someone whom I spotted as part of the 2%. That's Shruti. Now, you do the India ones. And that's really just how that evolved. There were a lot of them. Not all the applicants even necessarily spoke good English. Shruti speaks Hindi, Tamil, has some acquaintance with other Indian languages. So that was just perfect for me.
So there are fewer talent spotters in the world than talent?
Absolutely. Talent spotter is harder. And you can see this measured readily in sports, where you have many players stepping into roles as coaches, general managers, and some of them do quite well, but a lot of them really do not do well. And the ones who do well are not necessarily the ones who are the stars.
Yeah.
So it depends, but it's a complicated relationship. You have to be talented yourself. But say LeBron James is not necessarily the best talent spotter for basketball. He has too many biases. He too much wants things to be his way, is the tendency one sees. So I think, 98% of people, you can make them better at spotting talent by just teaching them to avoid basic mistakes. But that 2% or whatever, you really can make much better, that they have the intuition and it can be finely honed.
Yeah, I would agree that this is not something I think that's easy to teach. It can't be taught, but it can be learned, by practice, by trying to keep an eye out for specific things, and a lot of trial and error, and what might work or what might not work, and not letting the baggage of the last application succeeding or fail weigh too heavily on the next one, and so on. So I do think there's a lot of instinct. Yeah.
What did you two learn in different parts of the world that then changed how you might overall assess talent? Is there something that you learned when assessing talent from Europe, Africa, India, other parts of Asia, that then changes what questions you ask in America, for instance?
Rudy,
I don't ask any questions in America, Tyler.
you're asking one right now. I would say a few things. The hardest thing is cultures where people feel the need to be polite.
Yeah.
And those are hard to crack. And I think you just do less well when you interview people from those places. Now, India as a whole is not necessarily one of them, but especially parts of Africa. Now, I readily believe people other than myself are better at that. That's why I'm not running EV Africa. That's Rashid Griffith. But for North Americans and what I would call Northwestern Europeans, to just ask people direct questions works much better than you would think. Just flat out ask them, like I'll ask people, how ambitious are you? And you might think, oh, people are going to lie, but they're not very good at lying in response to that question if they're not ambitious. You can't always take the answer literally. So some very ambitious people, they might say they're not that ambitious, but then they'll outline in great detail all these wonderful plans they have. And it's the detail you need to evaluate, not the yes or no. With respect to the answer, it's also been striking to me how much talent is concentrated geographically, much more than I would have thought. It's not that people are from the same parts of the world, but they end up in a few common parts of the world. So the greater ease of making it when you're in one of those parts of the world, I always knew it was a major factor, but I never quite knew how big a factor it was.
Yeah, on the politeness, the thing I've noticed with the Indian applicants is they're very deferential. I think just culturally, it'll always be yes, Dr. Shruti, no, doctor. Like it'll always start like that, and very quickly I'll tell them, please, you can relax. And I think those first 5 minutes of just making people more comfortable works well. The other thing I've noticed is people who are really passionate about a topic, at least the Indians, they can't shut up about it. So there's very little work to be done. Like you just sort of, like wind the key and you let them go, and then they will tell you everything that they want you to know about that particular project. So it's actually really easy, very few follow-up questions required once the ice is broken.
When I went to when you two invited me to the Indian EV branches unconference last August, I definitely learned so much about really random topics like the Indian aerospace industry. Okay, you're just having breakfast with somebody and you leave with this PhD dissertation in your hand. It was definitely there. I have one more question, if you allow, and then we will open the floor.
Sure.
And then we will come back to the stage later, but I want to give our dear attendees multiple opportunities to ask questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand. You can use the raise hand feature under reactions, and I will try to get to you as fast as possible. Tyler, you spoke about belief systems when I saw you on stage with Danielle Gross in San Francisco a couple of months ago. And I have to admit, I've been thinking about this ever since. You basically say that one of the keys to resilience, which then is one of the foundations of lasting talent, is that the individual has an extensive belief system. And in your argument, this means that if somebody's belief system is narrow, they will react much more negatively to setbacks. So if your belief system is that you have to make money quickly, I'm using my own example here, you have much better examples, then if you fail to make money quickly, then that belief system collapses and you might give up. Whereas people who have expansive belief systems can find other things from which to gain strength and keep going. As you were talking about this, myself, much more familiar with the American dream as a civic religion, I immediately thought about that and my ambitious American friends who have these lifelong drives that I admire so much. Do you think that there's an equivalent of this present in different geographies? And what would be the Indian version?
I like it when people believe that what they're doing is really, really important. Because if you think about a startup or trying to be a public intellectual or just running a podcast, if you think about it in purely selfish, rational terms, you can have a really good life not doing any of that crap, so to speak, right? Get a good job, have your friends, family, whatever. So to be motivated enough to stick with it all through the setbacks, which are extensive, no matter how well you end up doing, requires something extra in belief. I think it's a great strength of the United States, how much of that it has. So if you would have put it in biblical terms, if you read, say, Acts of the Apostles, it presents this notion of a calling. And calling is something very different from religious conversion. I think from the point of view of projects, feeling a sense of calling is more useful. In America, partly for Protestant reasons, partly for frontier reasons, maybe because it's also a big country and people often, when came here, they left their parents behind, but it's a wonderful place for people having a sense of calling, sometimes crazy callings. Now, as for India, I'll turn that now over to Shruti.
Yeah, I think in the Indian case, there is one additional problem, which is the entire system and society is really completely about conforming to the mold, right? So a lot of the EV people are, they're very well educated in whatever they are passionate about. And so then there is pressure to conform, right? You're really good at this, which means you must, like in Naman's case, for instance, then you must be an engineer because what you're doing is fundamentally an engineering problem. And how does one become an engineer? They become an engineer by going to an engineering program and spending 4 or 5 or 6 years, so on and so forth. So one part of, I think EV India is also, the applicants themselves, they will tell you how strong that belief is, especially when they're willing to break any kind of model that has been set for them to conform to. And that I see in almost all the EV winners in India. Like there's something that was expected of them and their belief was just so strong, they didn't care and they figured out another way to do what they wanted to do. The other part of the EV belief, this is really weird, and this was one of my personal sort of discoveries, is how much it matters that I believe in them. Which, I mean, of course I do. I'm, picking them among dozens of applications and, putting my faith in them. So that's a given, but somehow it seems to have some bizarre value on its own, which I can't quite understand. And so I feel oftentimes like what I really bring to the table is the strong faith I have in all the EV winners. Many people who've not won either, but I think they'll do very well. But I have this really strong faith that these are exceptional people. They're going to do really well. Their projects are just incredible. They'll change the world, and that somehow really matters to them personally.
I could not agree more, having been to the India Unconference, and the amount, I mean, some of you are here, the amount of talent per square centimeter there was absolutely unbelievable and life-changing. And I can see people in the room here who actually, just to make this more meta, are not only, benefiting from your talent work and talent support, but they also started doing their, I mean, Intrinsic has now started a micro grant. We have Linus here in the audience who is also working on talent research, and the possibilities seem to have widened, and that's absolutely fantastic to see. I would love to, unless you have any comments on that, I would love to open the floor to the audience. If you have any questions. This is a safe space. Raise your hand, jump in. If you're an EV winner, we would love to hear from you. Tell us what you've been doing since August. Raul, jump in. Love the background, big belief system. There you go.
Yeah, it's just, I can walk that, right? Yeah. Yeah, so my question is, so I see EV as a method to, you're smashing bureaucracy basically, right? And so bureaucracies are made of people. Like, how do we conduct ourselves better at the individual level, to reduce the amount of bureaucracy in the system? Because, I kind of feel like when we are in the system, it's hard to actually objectively see that it's around us and we are part of it and we're completely contributing to it. So that's my question.
Have faith. There's a lot of the bureaucracy comes from having to vet people and, showing to other people, not just the work you're doing, but that you're doing work and that you have done your diligence and so on. So I think I don't ask for much diligence, just simply because, I have faith, and I'm sure there will be some rate of error and I'm willing to live with it. And Tyler is actually more than willing to live with it, which is why I can be a little bit, comfortable and chill about it. But having faith cuts a lot of bureaucracy for me personally with EV.
And I never ask the people working for me to justify what they're doing.
Yeah.
So if Shruti came to me, what should I do about this? But she doesn't. And that's good. I wouldn't want to tell her what to do. It's like, well, do what you think. If I can be helpful on some matter of substance, like, read some economics paper, what did I think of the economics? That kind of help I would do, but not to try to substitute your judgment throughout the whole system and make it less decentralized. I think it works better when you have a kind of faith in the people you're working for. And just I've realized working in Emergent Ventures now for 4 years, just how much the rest of the world works on credentials and how terrible that is. Just an awful thing. And we don't ask for any credentials on the application form at all. And I've never wanted to change that.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Actually, Julia, you have a question that's very closely related to that. And I'm so glad as a fellow European. Do you want to say it? Are you happy to jump in?
Of course. I'm sorry. Maybe I jumped the line. I just realized that there's a bunch of hands. But I was just thinking about. So I'm from Lithuania originally, and I was thinking about there's like talent in Lithuania and in Latvia, Estonia, and so on. And I think sometimes what I have noticed is that there's so much talent there, but there's also this sense of like I know is described as the tall poppy syndrome, that if you are aiming for something big, other people will kind of make fun of you, which I never feel is the case. For example, living in Silicon Valley is like, well, your dreams are too small. Maybe like that's what you are taking away from your surroundings. But nobody is ever like making fun of other people who are aiming for big things. So I was wondering about like maybe both Tyler and Shruti can speak to that in terms of like what it's like in India, and maybe like Tyler maybe has also thoughts about Eastern Europe. I would be very curious to hear those. Thank you.
So honestly,
Shruti, you
in
go first.
India, thanks. In India, I haven't seen much of the making fun of people part. Maybe I'm just, I think at this point, a different generation. I'm not the actual talent, right? So they can probably answer better if people make fun of them. But I do see skepticism. And it's almost like an elite sort of clever signaling thing to do. The more skeptical you are about other people's plan, the smarter you must be, because you're asking all these skeptical questions. And, so I see a lot of that kind of signaling by skepticism. Instead of saying, hey, this is a great idea, can you tell me more? And I think it'll be awesome, and you can do it. I'm skeptical about many, the actual success rate of many of these things working out, not because the talent is not good, but simply because some of these things are just really tough to do. And oftentimes the government has shut down some EV winners projects and taken them over and things like that. So, there is some skepticism involved, but it's not the signaling sort. But I've somehow been very fortunate. The EV community doesn't do much of that within. Everyone in the EV community is just, at least when I interact with them, they're very supportive of each other's projects, and everyone's super helpful and super encouraging and very generous. So somehow culturally, that community has got it figured out quite right.
My view is most of the world has tall poppy syndrome. I used to live in New Zealand. This is now a long time ago. And the New Zealanders would talk about, oh, tall poppy syndrome, tall poppy syndrome. And then you go other places and they'll say, we have the worst tall poppy syndrome. I don't think New York City has it, but I think this is a big reason why talent tends to cluster, that people want to leave places that have too much tall poppy syndrome and move to London, Toronto, New York, Bay Area, some of the major cities in India. You asked about Eastern Europe. I've never been to Lithuania, I'm sorry to say. But when I think of Russia in particular, it strikes me as a culture that actually is fairly sympathetic to weirdos. Not in the same way that America is, but if you read Russian literature, it's full of weirdos who are not just all the bad characters. So I think the largest country in Eastern Europe, Russia, and Ukraine, which is fairly large, have a wonderful tradition of weirdos and nonconformists. And I know quite a few people from Russia and Ukraine. My wife is from Soviet Union, grew up in Moscow, and they love weirdos. So I think that's one reason why those places have a lot of talent, even though their per capita income is not great and their politics has been really terrible for a long time, especially now, but not just now. India, only Shruti is allowed to talk about India, but I'm going to say something anyway. I don't even know if she agrees with it. She talked earlier about all the conformity in India, but it strikes me as a place where you have some degree of freedom from that conformity, because there's so much diversity of language, of caste, of religion, of group, of state, of city, just so many people, so many different ways you can be connected to groups, that I think there's a lot of room for the unusual. And since there's so many people, you might be sharing your form of the unusual with someone else in any case. But I think of it also as a culture with some degree of implicit sympathy for weirdos, even if the formal norm is, oh, conform, your family, and so on. So that's one reason why I think India has done well lately with talent.
Here's to the weirdos. I think maybe applicable, Tyler, your notion that America is a great place for well-adjusted weirdos. I think that was the quote. So maybe
They're not all well-adjusted, to be clear.
Absolutely, but maybe this is what differentiates really geography from geography. How well-adjusted a weirdo you have to be to succeed. In some parts of Eastern Europe, at least the ones I'm familiar with, there's a lot of success for not well-adjusted weirdos, and it's not necessarily good success, or it requires maybe talents of a darker sort to get ahead in life. Thank you so much. Taylor, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Hi, Tyler. Hi, Shruti. It's great that you guys are doing this. I went to the book interview that you guys did in San Francisco a couple months back, so good to see you both again. So my question is, Tyler, you said earlier that talent spotting is more scarce than talent itself, but it doesn't seem that talent spotters get paid as much as talent in many cases. GMs don't get paid as much as players. Board members don't get paid as much as CEOs. Is talent spotting undervalued?
Well, it depends. Forgive the dog barking. If you think of venture capitalists as the ultimate talent spotting game,
That's the counterexample, yeah.
the good ones are paid an enormous amount. So they're earning more than athletes, even though they don't, like, per se, have a talent of their own other than talent spotting. The truly rare thing are those who can spot the talent spotters, right? That's more rare yet.
Yeah.
I do think it's undervalued in the sense that you can spot talent and someone else might end up like getting the equity in that talent. But enough of it seems to happen. People, for the most part, are good-natured. They want to help others. And to spot and identify talent, it's something you can do in the course of doing other things as well. So I think that helps us get a fair amount of it.
Yeah. But in the example of the VC, like Peter Thiel didn't make as much as Mark Zuckerberg, right? And he's spotted him in Facebook, for example, right?
Well, I don't know what are the personal fortunes of those two individuals, but Peter has numerous successes above and beyond Mark. And Mark's portfolio, by its very nature, is undiversified. So Peter's done very, very well. Now, Mark produced a network good, right? Facebook. But being a good talent spotter, it's both rewarding. I wouldn't use the word relaxing, but as jobs go, it's pretty fun. And you get to deal with a lot of different ideas in a way that you may not if you're just running a company. So it's pretty well rewarded, in my opinion.
Yeah, I also look to things like, India is full of, this is not a very a highbrow thing to talk about, but India is full of these terrible reality shows, like, sort of like America's Got Talent has an India version and American Idol has an India version and so on and so forth. They're enormously popular, and all the people who are like kind of sort of retired, musicians or retired dancers, retired Bollywood stars who pop up as judges are very well compensated. They do a great job. These shows routinely pop up fantastic talent, and actually the more obscure part of India and the poorer the family, and oh my God, this person comes and his dad is a rickshaw driver and like his mother doesn't have an arm. Those are the people who end up getting spotted and make great television. So they're also really spotting people from obscure places and difficult circumstances. And they're getting rewarded quite well. I believe they make lots of money. So I would actually also go beyond the traditional VC model. I don't know if college admissions officers are talent spotters or talent blockers, but I believe the number of administrators has exploded, and also they are far better compensated than, say, professors or other people who work at a university. So I think it's a little bit there everywhere. I think it just depends on how large the market is for the particular kind of talent that we're talking about. Obviously, the VC market's just very well developed, especially in the US.
we've all also learned something about your television watching taste, Shruti, that we will never forget.
Oh yeah, I have very lowbrow tastes.
I went to an event in New York City a few nights ago. It was very interesting. And I went for a very definite reason. So it's a dinner party in Manhattan, and they get together like twice a week, 10 to 12 people, and all of them are well known. But when you show up, you're not allowed to tell anyone who you are. And the group cooks a dinner together. And then at the end of the evening, based on your interactions, you try to guess what the different people do. And this was interesting to me for a few reasons. But one is, these people are in some way well known. And you ask yourself honestly, if I just met them and didn't know they were at this dinner, would I actually have spotted their talent? And there was a whole bunch of people when I knew the answer was yes, and a whole bunch of people where I knew the answer was no. Like they would have fooled me. And at the end of the evening, you learn like, oh, that's you, But throughout the evening, you're thinking like, So for me, it's an important, like sobering dose of reality. You always want to be confronting your own failures and trying to process them. Not just the people you pick who don't work out, like that's always in front of you, but the people you wouldn't have picked. And that's a hard thing to practice. So whenever you have a chance to practice the people you wouldn't have picked, I think there's a very high return to thinking critically about that.
How many incredible ballet masters had passed on Nureyev, who had built up other fantastic dancers, and then went and told Nureyev that he had short legs. And then he was just better than all the long-legged competitors eventually, but got passed on. Absolutely. Linus, do you want to jump in? And then I will take the mic back for a moment.
Sure. I'd love to ask a question about credentialing and signaling. My hypothesis is that credentialing and signaling is always at a dynamic equilibrium where it's initially very high signal, and then as it becomes well known that it's high signal, then it's a little bit like the law of shitty click-throughs where other people rush in who just want the credentials, and there's a decay in the value of that credential, and then you just invent a new credential. And so do you feel like that is a consistent dynamic equilibrium that will, go through the 21st century and beyond? Or do you feel like there is a structural answer if we talk about, being able to create a system of talent searchers, recruiting talent searchers that can actually create a more stable equilibrium of high signal credentials?
I just think there'll be a lot more ways of certifying yourself that are not, I went to Harvard. One of them could be projects like Emergent Ventures. Another could just be, well, this AI says I'm really great. And I think we're going to see an explosion in this area. Mostly healthy, it'll be confusing, maybe harder on young people because the path won't always be so obvious. But those who act entrepreneurially can save years of their life and maybe get some superior opportunities.
I think as a system, credentialism also has to do with the way the incentives are set up in the bureaucracy. So, for instance, Mercatus is a place like, this will put things in perspective. Once Tyler asked me, without exaggeration, EV India seems to have like too many successes. Are you taking enough chances? Like, why are all the projects succeeding? Like, why are they all so good, right? Now, this is not a question, I don't know if anyone else would ask that question. And it also made me think about, am I being too conservative and am I taking enough chances and so on? But the attitude at Mercatus and EV very much is set at the top with Tyler, and it is, you're not going to be punished for your failures. You're not even going to be sort of, forget punishment, but it's not like they'll kind of, worry about, I think the failure rate here is too high. That is kind of built into the model, which means I never have to worry about credentials because I never have to justify a choice to a superior or a peer or any kind of review. Now, the sorts of philanthropic grants that Tyler gave up on because they took too much time, I've met these people, they're very well-intentioned, but basically they operate in a bureaucracy where everyone is constantly asking them to justify their actions. And the easiest way for a bureaucrat to justify the actions is, oh, I gave the grant to someone who's got a PhD from Harvard. I mean, it may have gone wrong, but then you can't fault me for that kind of a decision. And that's where I think credentials are used as a crutch. So I see it very much as a reflection of terrible incentives within the philanthropic or VC space. In fact, I've often criticized Indian VCs that too much credentialism has seeped in there. And maybe some of the Indian winners can, correct me or chime in. Indian VCs have very few founders. They're mostly MBAs. And no wonder they're looking for credentials because they aren't founders themselves and they are not entrepreneurs, but they're MBAs and like very smart finance track people, and they got brought in to this world because they're good at doing valuations or something like that. So I think Indian VCs oftentimes end up waiting for an American signal. If an American VC or grant maker will invest in a firm, then Indian VCs will kind of jump on them. And so I see this very much the system problem as one of bad incentives. Incentives can be fixed quite easily. So it can start with a single institution like Mercatus, and maybe more people will copy the model.
Thank you so much. I'm so interested in this idea of wasting time when it comes to talent. And of course, bureaucracy is one of the prime ways through which we waste time. I remember the first time I read about this whole ethos of the dropout in the US as the biggest signaling of being both intelligent and entrepreneurial. For instance, where I come from, this is not at all the case. At my university, which was by default 5 years, and you would get a master's at the end, and you had to choose at 18, a lot of people it was a pyramid, a lot of people got accepted, and that it was an endurance sport. Are you good enough to finish? And so the only way you can signal that you're good is that you're there for 5-6 years. And I know that Henry Oliver is here, whose area of expertise is late bloomers, and I often wonder about this great push in American society, which to my surprise, I also saw in India, where 16, 17, 18, you're supposed to be out there and learning in public, working in public, showing, versus the Victorian ideal of the poetess at home working for the embroidery drawer, and then somehow at 80 being discovered. I'm very curious what you guys think about this, the role of time. And Henry, if you want to jump in and contradict all of us, we would love that. Shruti, did you have really old applicants?
I had some old applicants, but India is so young. I mean, just demographically, it goes the other way, right? So 50% of India almost is below 27, I think, something like that. So the applicants tend to be younger. I think 2 of the 3 EV India winners here are still in their teens. And so that can, yeah. So that's where we are. I think Naman just finished high school and Chandana is about to take her 12th grade, A-levels, something like that. And yeah, so India skews young. Yeah, Ruhu's a college graduate. We forgive him.
Tyler, do you give preferential treatment based on age versus geography, or is that part of the application completely blind?
Well, we have some very successful older winners. I'm not even sure how old they are, but they're over 40. I do think you approach it differently. So if someone is coming to you at age 52, you want to know what the project is. If someone is coming to you at age 17, you want to know about them. Yeah. They're going to end up on a different project in most of those cases. So if you're impressed with them, you don't sit around agonizing over the project. So that's the main difference. But we have a lot of older winners, younger winners, but I think you have to approach it in this manner with a difference.
Yeah, and also, I don't know, in India, I found a lot of the older applicants are just not as ambitious. Their projects are typically not the moonshot sort of projects. They're like very safe, I want to write this boring paper kind of thing. So they're just, I mean, unless it's a really important topic and there's some other merit to it, the younger people just seem to be completely uninhibited in sort of the size of their ambition and what they're trying to do. So I think those are the people who are more likely to apply to EV. I think the older lot who are more conservative also find other kinds of, grant opportunities. They're just better at looking for those.
And on the application form, we don't ask age.
Yeah.
So once I had quite an amusing Zoom call, I read the application and I thought, well, this person seems like a pretty good scientist, but I'm not entirely sure they know enough about the field to justify this grant. But let's have a call with them. And then I get on the call, the person's like 15 years old. And it's like, okay, you know enough, and that was approved.
Yeah.
But I was expecting like a 27-year-old postdoc. So those things happen when you don't ask about credentials. But that was a pleasant surprise. Like if you're at that stage by 15, like we'll take a chance on you.
I love it. Thank you so much. And Naman, you had your hand up. Do you want, I saw you raise your hand when we were talking about credentials. So I don't know, but I think it's quite related. Age and credentials usually go hand in hand. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think just because Shruti was talking about the VC ecosystem, I was just wondering if I could give my thoughts. The conversation's moved on a bit, but in general, I think a lot of what she said is true about the Indian VC ecosystem, although I can definitely see it getting better. I think like you have like different tiered VCs in India, and you still have a lot of bad VCs that are, that's very MBA driven and all, but you do see the rise and prominence of a lot of good VCs. I think it's like still not so much at the stage of VCs being built by founders, but it's a lot of VCs that were early employees in a lot of major companies. And generally, like those types of investors are almost as good as founders, maybe better because they have experience with different companies. But yeah, I think it is definitely changing for the better. And you have some VCs that are really good at doing this.
I really believe in the good example here. Like EV India is showing a good example and changing the norms around Indian VC. I mean, we saw a bunch of VCs at the conference, and you could tell that in 1.5 days, some of the mindset had already changed. Thank you so much. Josh, I think you are our next victim. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I had a question. I know I'm reading about EV, especially like talking about COVID, there's a lot of implicit and explicit criticism of existing institutions. And I'm sort of wondering where you think this is going like 10, 15 years, 20 years down the line. I mean, do you think that like things like EV, like these sort of that are decoupled from existing institutions will be the primary drivers of innovation? Or do you think institutions are going to get better or some sort of hybrid will emerge?
I think it'll be all of those. Things like EV will be bigger. Other institutions will learn from it and get better. There'll be hybrids. But keep in mind, EV is part of Virginia's largest university with 37,000 students. We're an offshoot of a very mainstream institution that has creative autonomy within its sphere. But we're not totally out there on planet Mars, right? We're an innovation within a pretty well-known structure.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think in India, in particular, they just have to experiment with more sort of formal institutions which are smaller scale. Like right now in India, everyone just looks to the federal government to do everything all the time in what is a very large country and has very diverse circumstances and needs. So what I see happening in the future is also just much more experimentation within government bodies, executive agencies, not just sort of, philanthropic institutions. So I always encourage when I'm doing my more academic and policy work that they need to go small, which can keep things nimble and experiment a lot by introducing more small ventures or experiments.
I mean, Evie, you guys tried to keep it small and look what happened. So we'll see. The biggest successes come from something that you're like, let's just do this small little thing here and we'll be fine. Let's keep it quiet. Randy, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. I'm curious. I'd like to get Tyler's point of view on the role of polymaths versus domain experts as being part of the talent identification process. And then maybe from a secondary perspective, how do you think about the threshold for domain expertise, not credentialism per se, but expertise and understanding if the person is the right talent to tackle the problem?
Those are two very good questions. I think we need both polymaths and specialists. Obviously, for Adam Smith-like reasons, the importance of specialists grows as there's more division of labor in markets and in science. But at the same time, the more specialists you have, the more you need people who are at least partially polymathic to tie together what they all should be doing. So in that sense, the polymaths are never defeated. I think there's a whole bunch of areas where you need domain expertise to evaluate people. If I think, for instance, of Emergent Ventures investments in biomedical areas, there's so many parts of biomedicine. I don't think I can really judge any single one of them very well. Our biomedical investments tend to be in teenagers where I'm judging the person. And if someone comes along, at age 47 and they have some really complicated formula for a new cure for something, I'll just say, look, I can't judge if that's right, but if that's right, you should be able to persuade an expert in your field of that now, and you don't need our money. So we're going to fund like the weird 17-year-olds who maybe don't have a coherent task they could present to a foundation, but more resources will smooth their paths to becoming successful scientists in the future. So I think you have to know what you can judge and what you can't judge. And if you can't judge, look for ways where you can contribute to that area by judging the talent rather than like the proposal in the narrow sense.
Thank you so much. Shruti, do you have any comments?
No, I think I agree with Tyler.
Okay. Henry, we will take the last question then. I'm so glad that you raised your hand. This is fantastic. Just to keep the conversation super meta and everything is a layer of everything else. Beautiful.
So my question is, how predictable is talent and how important is it to find, what level of unpredictability is it important to look for in talent?
Shruti?
Yeah, I have gotten more comfortable with unpredictability. I was very thrown off by it when I first started looking at applications, and it could be even something as small as they don't quite sound the way I expect them to sound, because, I've been in university my whole life and I've lived abroad the last 15 years, and there are some people in India from smaller towns who just don't speak English quite that well or can't coherently explain their project in English and will have to, speak in more than one language. Sometimes it's age and just, not having quite the right, Naman not having an engineering degree or something. So I've just gotten more comfortable with finding things that just look peculiar. And now I think I'm at a point where I go looking for them. So I don't know if that puts me in the predictability category or it still keeps things fresh. Yeah, I think talent can be quite predictable when we're talking about clusters. So what I find as patterns that are emerging is there's a certain age cohort where we see a lot of applicants, or there are certain cities from where lots of applications, pop up. Increasingly, there are more and more people who are willing to drop out of regular institutions. That has become another pattern that I look for. So in those terms, now there's just a little bit more predictability, just because you go through a certain number of applications and you start seeing these patterns.
As an economist, I would distinguish between the marginal case and the inframargin. Inframarginally, I think most talent is predictable almost by definition. So a graduating class from Harvard, they're going to do a lot of great things. There's just not really any denying that. But if you're looking for people where you can make a difference at the margin, given that like I, Tyler Cowen, am not Harvard, then you want to be looking for the unpredictable. Doesn't mean Harvard should be looking for the unpredictable to the same degree. I think they should a bit more at the margin, but I'm pretty sure on my margin, I've got a plumb for the weirdos, so to speak. Not that you're one of them. No way.
We always
We're
talk
all
about
weirdos.
like we
We
have a
embrace
weirdo
it
friend.
now.
I think all EV winners, we all know that we're at least a little bit weird. Like we made it in somehow. Something has to be a little bit at least uncategorizable. Hands up here. Who's an EV winner? All right, that's not bad. We have a lot of EV winner hosts as well, so that it gets very, very, very meta. And this actually takes me to my closing question. So when you were opening the Udaipur EV Unconference, Tyler, you were talking a little bit about scenes. And of course, Interact is obsessed with scene. I mean, this is, it's not hard to guess. But, you know, I also come from Budapest, which had its own beautiful literary and scientific scenes. In Udaipur, you were talking about Vienna. And we know from history that it is possible to make scenes. The question really is it kind of a natural phenomenon that happens, or an emergent phenomenon, or is it really driven by individuals? Is it intentional? Has something changed in your assessment of how scenes work since you studied EV India? Where do you see the Indian scene going, and what can we do to make it maybe a more integral part of how we think about the world's talent?
There were fewer scenes than I had thought when I started. I think Ontario is a neglected scene, even though people end up leaving it for the most part, but very important for North America. But I think by far India has taken the talent lead. It's like Central and Eastern Europe would have been in the early to mid 20th century, just incredible things coming from those places. It's more than one scene in India. I don't have the whole picture in my mind, but it's just obvious to me. And just if you look at like Indians who are CEOs of major companies in Silicon Valley, it's far beyond what you would expect. So, you know, I very much believe in making a big bet on the Indian scene right now, and we're doing it.
Yeah, in terms of what all of us can do, I think it's just help them make connections with people in the rest of the world. Right now, the Indian scene is very much in India or gets exported to sort of Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, you know, either through the tech channels or the VC channels. So just getting them better integrated with the rest of the world, getting them better integrated with Africa, because Africa demographically will follow India. You know, a lot of the challenges in Africa are just exactly where India was, say, 40, 50 years ago. So just, you know, better networked, I think that's the key. It shouldn't matter that they're Indian. That scene should be everywhere.
Amen to that. I mean, when I went to Bangalore, that was absolutely mind-blowing. You go there, and this was my first time in India. It's like if Miami and LA were good. That was the first thought as I left the airport. Not a very polite thought, but you know, Mr. European, we don't have a politeness problem. We just think it and say it. Any closing, anything on your hearts, guys, that you have to get rid of right now? I will leave 2 minutes for quick codas to Tyler, to Shruti, but the economics of talent, yourself, something you're working on right now and you're dying to tell us. Rahul, what are you working on right now? I can see on your face that you want to tell us.
What am I working on right now, you asked me? You know, I was actually working on just creating a message to say thank you to Tyler and Shruti, because I'm a big fan, actually. I've spent a lot of hours listening to these guys on YouTube, so it feels pretty good.
You're most welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, Shruti, I actually
all.
told a friend recently that, you know, hey, Shruti Rajagopalan, this economist at George Mason, recently liked a tweet of mine. So I'm still waiting for Tyler to do that. But anyway.
That's what we do here. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Shruti.
Thank you, Anna. Bye.
This was a
Thanks,
pleasure,
guys.
Anna. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
doing this.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.